Good afternoon.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on future-proofing your workforce and talent with a lens on diversity and inclusion. I'm your co-founder, Gabby.
And thanks, Gabby. I am Ashanti, and we are from Diversity Ally.
Hi there. Should we get the slides up?
Sure.
Amazing. So I'll just explain to you a little bit about Diversity Ally and who Ashanti and I are before we get started. So we are an organisation that helps events businesses and organisations become more diverse in their people, culture and image. And we do this in a variety of ways. So we do this through organisational assessments and audits, workshops and training, content and education pieces, and also through our events, such as our virtual roundtables and our Diversity in Events Awards and other events that we've got coming up, which we're very excited about, and we will share with you very soon.
Brilliant. So this is just some of the companies that we have worked with so far in the events industry globally. Okay, Gabby?
Yeah, I can't actually see the slide, so I don't know if everybody else can.
Ah, that's interesting.
I better check with you in case. If it's just me, fine.
Well, that's fine. So we were next going to start talking about the learning outcomes, weren't we? I'll reshare screen so that you can.
Yeah.
There we go. Let me know if you can see from here.
Yeah, I can see that now. Fantastic. Thank you, Ashanti. Yeah, so today's session, we're going to look at how to prepare your workforce for welcoming diverse talent, how to source diverse talent in an industry where perhaps it isn't actually that diverse, and also how to generate long-term return on investment through diverse recruitment. And I'll hand over to you, Ashanti.
Brilliant. So those are our three main learning objectives. We know that these are really broad pieces, and you may well have some very specific questions regarding how you can diversify your talent pool and future-proof yourself. But the question is, why is this important? Because maybe things are going quite well in your organization right now. You are sourcing the kinds of people you'd love to work with. Maybe you have a referral scheme. We know this is completely very common in the events industry that you ask your employees to refer other great candidates. Well, here's the thing. Right now, especially this year with the current climate, what we have seen is that there is a real strong push and interest, essentially, from the next big buying consumer market. And that is obviously your younger millennials and then your Generation Z employees. And they are really interested and invested in the diversity of their peers, their co-workers and employees. And what that really means is that they expect the brands that they work with, work for, and buy from to be truly diverse, not only when it comes to employees, but also who they work with. Secondly, if you are really thinking about how you can come through this crisis, how you can create more sustainability in your business, of course, having brilliant and bright talent is definitely one of the solutions. And actually, the more diverse a cohort is, the more innovation and creativity. And obviously for you as a business, you're going to be thinking about productivity and profitability, and definitely diversifying your talent pool and seeking to retain them is a great strategy to use to not only survive this period of time, but thrive beyond COVID. So what is it that we can be thinking about first? Well, quite often we know that, recruitment is the first go-to and very popular thing to do. However, we often use the analogy that, before we try to plant things, before we want to see those buds coming up, it's really important to have really healthy soil. And that's what we mean when we talk about company culture. Before we start including, embracing, inviting, and trying to welcome new people, what is our current company culture or soil like? Okay, how healthy is it? How rich is it? Is it primed to welcome new people? So it's really important to think about, how your existing employees feel, regardless of who they are, what they look like, etc. Are they happy? Do they feel safe? Do they feel included? Because often that's a great litmus test for you to begin to think about the things that you could improve and therefore invite new candidates into the space. So really think about your existing company and be honest and identify areas in which you can diminish or reduce maybe some of the inequality or the bias that might exist in your existing company. Here are some things to think about. What is your reputation internally and externally? When was the last time you surveyed maybe your existing employees and asked them how they feel about being an employee in your company? Are there things that they would love to see improved? What are you doing about those things? How comfortable are you talking about diversity and inclusion in general? Is the business ready to have conversations that might be quite difficult, that might mean that you as a leader or your employees have to acknowledge you don't have all of the answers? It's not an easy conversation. Which means quite often external, facilitators can be quite helpful to start coaching and molding these conversations so that you're able to really get some transparent and honest feedback about where and how you need to improve. Do you have a D&I policy? So we know that the events industry, for example, less than half of event industry or event companies rather have a diversity and inclusion policy on their website, and even less have a diversity committee, champion, or strategy. If you do have a policy, is that widely known? Is it accessible by your employees or even potential clients and partners? And then obviously the next question is, do you implement that strategy? Who's responsible? Who is accountable for ensuring that diversity and inclusion shows up in your workplace? That people feel like it is a diverse and inclusive place, not just because of what's written on the website, but also because of the way you treat each other. Okay, so that's also something to think about. And do you have transparent talent development? So you'll notice we've taken a certain structure there. We've talked about existing company culture. We've then talked about what diversity and inclusion strategies you have. And now we're really talking about, okay, what happens when people are here? Okay, how do we develop and invest in the talent that we have? Are those career pathways clear? Are they transparent? Is there equal pay, for example? Okay, what is life like for mothers or fathers who might be taking maternity or paternity pay? Those are just a few examples of things that, as an organization, you might want to be thinking about. How transparent and clear are our talent development routes for progression? Okay, so those are just very broad questions that you can start thinking about and considering when it comes to assessing current company culture. What soil do you have right now before you start trying to plant some new plants? So, what are the barriers, and can we think of any additional barriers? So, here's something for you to reflect on. Okay, how accessible, inclusive is your company for those who may have disabilities, both invisible and visible? What about those who are slightly older, maybe mature workers, and likewise for young workers as well? Those who have different religious beliefs, for example. How do you work out your working cycle? We know this is something that's really important in the events industry. If there are certain religious observances or festivals that are important to some of your employees or indeed your clients. So it really helps you start getting into the meat here, because diversity and inclusion, quite frankly, is actually about being fair in our distribution of resources, access, and power. And so the question for you as an organization is to think about, is access available to all? Are all of our resources available to all? And do the right people have power? Or is it a small minority of individuals who have power and are able to use that power within the organization? So these are really reflective points for you if you are, well, regardless of your seniority, essentially in a company, but if you are a senior member, if you are a people manager, a hiring manager, these are the things that you want to be thinking about and putting down honest answers for. Okay, because it will help you think about how you can truly prepare your current existing workforce to welcome new people. Okay, so that is the first section, which is thinking about current company culture. Back to you, Gabby.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashanti. Yeah, so how do we source diverse talent? If you're someone who is in charge of hiring or recruitment or talent development, or you're a manager who promotes within teams, hopefully this will be some useful kind of tips and examples for you of what we can do with that. So if we can just go to the next slide for me, please, Ashanti. Brilliant. So we hear a lot of reasons as to why businesses and organisations say they find it difficult to source diverse talent. And we've got like a few examples here. So we don't get many people of colour applying for the job, or we'd love to hire more women. But when we post, they don't apply, they're just not interested. So these are some of the things that we hear from different businesses and organisations. But I believe, and we believe at Diversity Ally, that it just takes a little bit of a creativity, a little bit of commitment and a shift in processes to really kind of change the landscape. And actually, there was a really interesting it was research, but it was also implemented by Zurich Insurance Group. And I've got some stats here, actually. And what they did was they showed that they changed their language, essentially, in their job postings. So they used gender-neutral language, and they saw a 20% jump in female applicants for management roles, a 16% rise in women applying for jobs at the company in general, and a 33% increase in the number of females hired for senior roles. And that's just by doing something small, such as just being mindful of the language that you use in your job postings and your job adverts. And these small changes can really kind of broaden and widen the landscape. So if we just go to the next slide for me, please, Ashanti. Thank you very much. So what can we do? What can we do as hiring managers, talent development, all that sort of thing? So if we just go to the next slide, please, we can look at some ways that we can build in a diverse candidate pipeline. So at number one here, we have diversifying your network. So research actually shows that 75% of white people don't have connections with people of colour on sites such as LinkedIn or other social media networks. So we tend to build our networks based on people who kind of look like us, think similar to us, maybe just have similar interests to us, which, you know, is common and obviously understandable. But unfortunately, when we have these homogenous kind of networks, it ends up being that we favour and advocate people who are in our networks already when we're looking to maybe refer for jobs and roles, which obviously means that it's really difficult and has a negative impact on creating diverse and inclusive workplaces. So this can be a challenge. Also, we can look at another way at diversifying a network by changing or adapting who we speak to at events. So obviously I know we're not attending live events at the moment just yet, but we can do this virtually and online as well. But just changing the different people that you talk to when you attend conferences or exhibitions or networking events, and trying to talk to people you wouldn't necessarily normally speak to, rather than kind of hanging out in our safe, normal groups where we feel comfortable. Obviously, this involves a little bit of getting outside of your comfort zone and kind of changing habits and just having a bit of a consciousness and awareness around that. But this is really a good way to start diversifying your network. And in addition to that as well, I'll give a little challenge. perhaps today or tomorrow, you can look at adding 10 people on LinkedIn or Twitter. And these people are people that don't look like you. Maybe they're not even in the same industry as you or have the same job role as you. Just people maybe that you find inspiring or interesting, and connect with them and engage with them, even if it's just a like on some of their posts or adding a comment. Or if you feel comfortable, direct messaging them. And this will help to build our contacts as well and help with diversifying our network. The next thing that we can look at is really varying where we post our job openings. So if you are in charge of hiring at your organisation, try posting on a variety of jobs boards. For example, LinkedIn is really tends to attract more male candidates, but there are other platforms and sites such as Indeed, Google, Glassdoor that have a broader, more balanced candidate base. So that is something to be aware of as well. And also perhaps try looking in different places for candidates, whether that is on these different LinkedIn groups and different networks, or perhaps even approaching associations that cater to Black and brown people or other underrepresented groups. Next, we can look at rethinking our referrals. As we know, the events industry is heavily built on the referral scheme, the referral system, which, you know, is great. It means that we are able to put forward people that we know well, perhaps on a personal and professional level. We know their standard of work. We've worked with them before, which is really understandable. But obviously, if people are outside of that network, that means that they are being excluded. So I really recommend rethinking the referral system. I mean, some organisations, I think, even offer bonuses with regards to referrals. So perhaps the organisation can think about there's a different type of incentive for people to recommend people from underrepresented groups, for example. Perhaps also it could be added into KPIs as well, to really challenge people and have them working in this objective. So that's another element that you can look at there. Also think about who is visible. Excuse me. So really review your the current demographics of your organisation. Are your diverse employees, if you have them, are they visible externally? Are they included in social media posts, perhaps when you're having off-sites or events? Do we see them as part of the team? Do we see them on any kind of marketing material? What sort of roles and positions are they in when they're managing, planning, assisting, running events? Are they kept behind the scenes? Are they given roles with a lot of responsibility? So really looking at how people are visible within the organisation, particularly from underrepresented groups. You can also look at utilising people within your organisation. This can be anyone. It doesn't have to be anybody from underrepresented groups or diverse employees, but those who have perhaps a strong external presence or network. They might be bloggers, podcasters, they might write, they might do your social media posts, and you could use these people to start reaching out to underrepresented groups and individuals. So definitely pull on that resource there. If you do have diverse people within the organisation, think about perhaps having them as ambassadors for the organisation, perhaps support them to become more visible within the business. You could ask them to perhaps, if they're comfortable, of course, speak at events or write more for blogs, anything that they're kind of comfortable with. And obviously it's key to set these people up for success if that is something that you do. It's not being tasked with something, given an opportunity, they're not supported along the way, and then it kind of all goes up in smoke and kind of leaves a bit of a sour taste in everyone's mouths. So really look at who is visible within your organisation and how you can make underrepresented groups and people more visible.
Yeah.
So number 5, you agree there, Shanti? I like that. Yeah. It's weird not seeing anybody, so I feel like I'm talking to myself, so thank you for that. So number 5, work with recruiters who are committed to sourcing diverse candidates. This is really key, and we really are seeing that recruiters are starting to take up the challenge now to look at how they are sourcing and representing diverse candidates, and they're proactively going out and seeking diverse people and people from underrepresented groups, which is brilliant. Also, I would recommend making sure that if you do work with recruiters, that you do request diverse candidates within your shortlist. And then finally, if we look at understanding the candidate journey, I think this is really key in our industry, because we talk a lot about transferable skills and how a lot of us may have not studied events management at university. We might have come from other areas and kind of hopped over into the events industry, events sector, because we've had additional transferable skills. But it's still a very, very tough industry to get into, and some sectors are particularly tough, particularly agencies and exhibitions and conferences. If you have not worked on these before, it's sometimes quite hard to get that foot in the door. So I think it would be really key to be mindful that we're not judging people on what education background they have, what subject they studied at university, what internships they've done, any volunteering experience, whether they've had a work break, what industry they came from before. We need to look at each candidate as an individual and try to understand their journey, the reasons why they took the steps they did, and how that led them to coming in and to entering or wanting to enter the events industry. Because that will really give you a key understanding of where the candidate comes from, and also their thought process and the actions and experience that they have that have led them to come into this community. I think sometimes as an industry, we do have a little bit of a snobbery or a fear of hiring people who don't have direct experience. And I think we need to become, if we can, more open-minded with regards to this, because it can be a bit of a roadblock that I think that we kind of need to reconsider. So those are just some ways that you can look at building and diversifying the talent pipeline there. Ashanti, if you want to go on to the next slide for me, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a really good point there, Gabby, regarding understanding the candidate journey, especially for traditional events companies, isn't it, who might rely on people working at other well-known events companies when they're hiring.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, I have direct experience of that. When my first role I luckily got, I ended up venue-based. Yes, I enjoyed it, but it lacked the creativity that I really aspired and enjoyed working in, the type of environments I like working in. I've tried, applied for agency work, for example, but it's very difficult to get in if you don't have that experience. So I have a direct experience that I can relate to on that one.
Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. So now, if you do all of the things, or some of them even, that Gabby and I have talked about this afternoon, so if you assess your current company culture, if you really get a grip on the data, and also the kind of lived experience of your current employees, if you create some type of diversity and inclusion strategy and make sure it's accessible, and also you're trying to implement the points within that strategy. And then if you think about how you are sourcing your talent, and at least try out one or two of the tips that Gabby has shared regarding placement, language in job description, even your approach to interviewing and shortlisting candidates. Now, you could put all of this effort in, but of course the commercials are important. And the question is, how can you generate return on investment, number one, but also long-term return on investment from diverse recruitment practices and methods? Well, here's the thing. This is something that you can engineer. Now, we know that recruiting and building teams is extremely challenging at the best of times. Trust us, we do know we are also employers as well. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go so well. However, there is a way to make sure that you see some long-term benefit for your company and for the welfare of your team. There are a few things that you can do, though, to increase your chances of success. The big one is debiasing your recruitment and interview process. Okay, so look at all of the stages, phases, and steps, some of which Gabby and I have covered already. Where are the chances that bias might be slipping in and maybe disadvantaging or excluding a certain type of person or group of people? You just have to think about neurodiversity, different learning types, invisible disabilities. Are there stages or phases of your recruitment journey and process that actually exclude those individuals, although you may not realize that's what's actually happening? So, the first thing is taking an honest look at the recruitment and interview process and trying your best to remove as much bias or opportunity for bias to creep in. Now, you can do all of that, but ultimately, systems and processes are made up of and implemented by real human beings. And so, this is why it's really important to involve and train your people. Okay, so all of the people, all of the stakeholders who touch recruitment, talent development, appraisals, pay rises, so your HR, your people managers, your hiring managers, and middle management. Okay, studies and research have shown that middle management in particular are the most squeezed level of management. They get the heat from the top and the heat from the bottom, but they are often not trained very well when it comes to managing people, although they have quite a lot of influence on how your company progresses, grows, and the company culture. So it's really important to make sure that you identify all of the stakeholders who have some type of relevance or link to this process and experience for new and existing employees. Train them well, not only on how to operate technically speaking when it comes to their job, but also when it comes to understanding what diversity and inclusion means and how that should show up in your company values. How should that show up in the way they speak and treat individuals? Not to mention how they use the processes and systems that you have in place. After you do that, you really need to focus on retention. So it's happy days, really successful if you manage to welcome some new diverse employees. The question is, how do you keep them there? And how do you get them to become almost employee influencers and activists so that they tell other people about why you are a desirable employer? So it's
Mm.
really important to start thinking about retention. How do we keep you? What do you need? Well, often retention and the key to retention lies in your talent development practices and career pathways. How transparent are those pathways? Do you think actively about how you can even the playing field for maybe employees who have disabilities, employees who fall under the category of neurodiversity, for example? Okay, so how are you investing in their talent? It's really key to making sure that the money and time that you as a company put into diverse recruitment pays off. The last two things we'll mention are things that are often forgotten, and they're big and quite scary things for companies: gender and ethnicity pay gaps. Now, depending on where you are in the world right now, if you're based in the UK, you might well know if you're working in HR that there will be some mandatory regulatory requirements coming in soon, and companies will have to start reporting their gender and ethnicity pay gaps. And that isn't an easy thing to do when A, you don't know how to deal with it, but B, you also know that the data isn't particularly favorable if you have been collecting data at all. So it's really time to start thinking about your gender and ethnicity pay gaps, because once you start delving into that, it also reveals areas that you could well be working on that will actually improve the experience for all of your employees, not just those who you may categorize as minorities. And the last little cheeky tip I can give you is looking at your exit interview data. So sometimes we don't always look at that data, okay? But it is the interview that you tend to do when an employee might well be leaving you. Well, guess what? Quite often when people are leaving, they tell us what they really think. Okay, they might raise things in that exit interview. And if you go back and look at the data, that could also reveal some trends. It might reveal data or information that could be very useful for you in terms of figuring out why people stay and why people leave. And once you're able to identify those trends, and if they reveal some gaps, you can plug those gaps so that you can keep saving money and, of course, improve productivity and profitability in the business as a whole. So, those are just some very broad, high level tips on how you can generate a long term return on investment from diverse recruitment. Over to you, Gabby.
I was muted. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ashanti. We do have other resources that you can turn to if you'd like to delve a bit deeper, if you'd like some advice or some support. So we do have our podcast, which is called Diversity Ally, the podcast, and find that on all the major podcast platforms. And we talk with leaders in the industry about a wide range of subjects to do with diversity and inclusion. So there's bound to be something in there that will offer you support and assist you. And also we have our Diversity Ally guide, and you can head to our website, diversityally.co.uk, and hit the guide tab, and you can download that. And that offers a lot of support around recruitment, talent development, a lot around what we were speaking about today. So that's an additional resource for you. And we also have a resource hub as well. And you can find all of this on our website. And don't forget to connect with us on LinkedIn at diversityally.co.uk, and also on Instagram as well, and then find Ashanti and I on Twitter. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to fire us any questions over, direct message us, and feel free to ask some questions now. Actually, I think we're opening up the floor, aren't we?
We are indeed. So if you have any questions with regards to recruitment, talent development, training, etc., please feel free to ask us. We're happy to answer them. So, Gabby, I mean, I think your points regarding kind of advert placement were really interesting. You know, we always get asked, don't we, where should we even place the advert if we're trying to get different types of candidates signing up?
Yeah.
You know, it's a really interesting one, isn't it?
It is, and those sites that I mentioned, actually, I mentioned quite big job platforms there, such as Indeed and Glassdoor and Google, and they are easy platforms that we can all find, but there has been studies showing that they do have a more balanced candidate pool. So that's really interesting versus LinkedIn. But there are other platforms and groups that you can contact, such as Black and Events, Black Young People's Professional Network. You can find these on LinkedIn and Twitter. Job seekers, there are definitely different places with a little bit of kind of little bit of research that you can find to reach out to these people.
Yeah.
We're all talking so much online at the moment anyway. I'll just fire the question out there somewhere and just I'm sure you'll get some responses.
Absolutely. Sure. And you're right. I think it's also really being clear on what kind of candidates you want, because ultimately, for example, you know, we did that recent podcast episode with Adil from the Ability People. So if you're looking to increase the numbers of disabled persons, for example, within your organization, reach out to charities and groups who actively work with disabled professionals, because of course they will want to expose their community to new opportunities, and you're looking for people in their community. So it kind of makes sense. It's logical to expand your placement practices.
And your network. So as I mentioned at the beginning, that if you expand your network, that will help you meet these people and guidance. So yeah, it's twofold really.
Now, how do you think that you can go about contacting these networks, or what should you say when you contact them? Because I think people often worry about that.
I think I'm talking from a personal perspective. You might have a professional perspective there, but I think if I was somebody who was looking to hire or source diverse candidates, I would be incredibly honest and just saying, I'm trying to expand my network. I want to reach out to people and organizations that I find inspiring and interesting to build up a connection, and then hopefully we can find ways to work together in the future. That's kind of how I would put it.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe I agree in terms of the transparency about why you're contacting them, what it is you're looking for, but also, as usual with any good collaboration, what value are you going to add?
Yeah, very true.
What value are you going to hard, because if you're just going to people, or companies and asking to have access to the community, and you're not going to be giving anything back, then it's a bit problematic, isn't it, from that perspective? One of the questions that we have received that I've noticed in the chat box function are, what are the best measurements for success when it comes to diverse recruitment practices? It's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one. You need to know where you are now currently as an organization, because otherwise anything that happens as positive, you can't measure it, and you can't reflect back and sort of say, right, we've improved this by this amount, this percentage. And every area that you're looking to make improvements or have success in, whether that is with regards to diverse recruitment, gone blank on another one, but whichever area it is, you might say, we would like to increase our candidate shortlist to include at least a quarter or half diverse candidates. So that you've got some sort of objective and place that you want to go in regards to measuring that. That's just one example with regards to using recruitment. Don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also, for example, you have to know, as you said, where you're starting from, not only in terms of your goals, but your existing workforce. Ask them, how diverse or inclusive do you think we are? How do you think we can improve in this regard as well? So you want to know where you're starting from, essentially, because, for example, you could have a predominantly, white, male and able-bodied workforce. That doesn't mean everybody's happy. That doesn't mean everybody is totally okay with your practices when it comes to talent development and pay rises. And so this assumption that because everybody appears to your eye to be the same, that means it's all okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all positive. So it's really important for organizations to be brave enough to ask these questions to their current workforce. And then you also know, how do we create this kind of great soil for our existing employees before we start welcoming new people in?
We've got another question here. Thank you, Ashanti. Do you think blind resumes are important for removing bias? They certainly aid in removing bias. Actually, there was an example. I was on a discussion a couple of weeks ago, and Karina Bao of IMX Group was on there. She said that there was something that they've actually implemented quite recently, blind resume reviewing. And she said that it actually did mean that their shortlist did have more diverse candidates in. So that's something that they tried and implemented, and they did see a change through implementing the blind resume objective. So that's interesting. I think Shanti was going to add something there.
I was on mute. So yes, that is really interesting. I think, as with every question about how important something is, it really just depends on what you're doing collectively overall. Doing one thing in isolation, like removing the names from a resume, may not give you high enough results, quite frankly, because if you're sourcing from the same pool, then it doesn't matter if you've removed names, essentially. So remember that these things often need to be done as part of an overall strategy. And that's the bit that we talked about, tracking every phase and stage of your recruitment and hiring practices, and then identifying where bias could be creeping in at every stage. And if one of those stages is when you get the resumes that, having people's names on it means that you don't get the type of diversity you're hoping for, then by all means, remove the names. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I would like to follow on from that a tiny bit, actually. As you said, the implementation needs to be throughout the process. And if we look at blind resume reviewing, that's great. We've got these brilliant diverse candidates that are coming in. But then if we get into the interview stage, and the panel still either has their own bias, own unconscious bias, or perhaps they're just not a diverse panel, just not a diverse panel of people, then there's still going to be that stumbling block right there at the end of that final moment. So as Ashanti said, it's the process, it's the whole process, from job posting to the sourcing the candidates, to the shortlisting, to the resumes and the interview process. All of that's incredibly important. if that is part of what your aim is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also on the question about removing bias, as I say, it's not just processes and systems. People are the ones really who make a process, who drive a process, who create systems. So actually, at the heart of it, we need to be training our people to identify bias that exists within themselves, but also bias that exists in the organization. And once you bring those biases to people's attention and then provide practical strategies that help them to diminish those bias, that is where you're going to see the most results, positive results. If I sit on an interview panel and when somebody comes in, they are in a wheelchair, for example, and immediately I'm making certain assumptions about their ability to do the job, for example, whether they're going to need time off for hospital appointments. We've lost the battle, because ultimately it doesn't matter whether we did a blind resume before that point and got them in for an interview. If in the interview I've already written them off, that is problematic, and that's where the bias is creeping back into the process. So it's really important to focus really actually on training, and really getting our people to be honest in themselves about bias that might exist.
Yeah, agreed. And this is a slight tangent, but I think it's also about having the courage to ask people what their needs are. So I'm just using your example there, Ashanti, of somebody who maybe comes in a wheelchair and you've already made an assumption, and perhaps you might even feel embarrassed to ask direct questions about what their needs might be. And I think it's really important that we become confident and have the courage to, obviously, if the person is happy to answer these questions, to ask them what their needs are and what support they require before making these assumptions. Got any more questions?
No, that's something that came out, didn't it, in most of our interview podcasts with individuals who may have a need, is this need to dignify people by asking them, what do you need from us? What can we do for you? Instead of making assumptions about what it is they need. So yeah, and also it can just save you a lot of time. Yeah, because as a team, you might be sitting around thinking, how can we, be more diverse and inclusive with this particular individual or this group of people, when you could just ask them and shortcut your way to reaching a place where everybody feels comfortable and included.
Agreed.
Wonderful. So I'm just checking to see if we have any other questions this afternoon. And also, actually, there was that question about the best measurements of success. So if you are looking at data, your gender and ethnicity pay gap data is going to be really key. What are you paying people? Where are the disparities? And actually, when you start tracking that data and actively trying to plug the gap, obviously, year 1, year 2, year 3, you should hopefully see an upwards trend of that gap getting slimmer and slimmer in terms of what individuals are being paid within your organization.
And that's why we're doing working with businesses on these audits and assessments, so we can benchmark, we can collect the data that's required, and then come up with the objective where we want to be. So to your point, Ashanti, it's about collecting that data initially and seeing where we are at initially.
Absolutely. And also it's also about thinking about how important is this to us as an organization. Really, how important is it? Because like any other business metric, and we're seeing it right now during COVID, businesses are making choices that are best for them based on what they deem to be priorities. And so diversity and inclusion is very much like any other business metric. If it's really important, if you believe that it's vital to future-proofing your company, then it is something that you will dedicate time and resource to, making sure that you become more diverse and inclusive over time. What are your thoughts on that, Gabby?
No, I totally agree with you. You said everything that I would have said. So, yeah, and I think it's as much as obviously this is a challenging time for everybody, this is also it's a time that we won't ever probably have again, where we are able to connect and reach out to more people. Maybe we have a little bit more time because we're not commuting to work, we're not attending those kind of networking events after work or exhibitions or socializing. So we do have that little bit of additional time. And what I would say is, don't wait until things become mandatory, like mandatory pay gap reporting, race pay gap reporting, before you start doing the work. The same way with sustainability, start changing your paper straws before they outlaw plastic straws. Get ahead of the curve, I would say, with regards to that.
No, you're absolutely right. Such a good point. Such a good point. It's because what happens is, by the time the mandatory regulatory stuff comes in, you're on the back foot. So now you're trying to scramble data together. Now you're trying to survey your audience, and doing that in a rush and under pressure isn't pleasant either. So that was a really good point, Gabby. Don't wait until essentially your feet are being held to the fire before starting to work on these things. And also what we saw, for example, from the Black Lives Matter movement earlier this year, and that re-emergence, companies felt under pressure, for example, to start making social statements, public statements, which quite frankly could have been avoided if they just thought, let's focus on the work that we're actually doing internally, as opposed to kind of bowing to public pressure or fearing scrutiny or scandal from, whistleblowers or, just their industry peers, because it's not something that they had been working on prior.
Yeah, really good point.
So we have another question in the chat box. Thank you for the presentation. What would you say is your biggest piece of advice for those in the MICE sector looking to get started with diversity and inclusion? Really good question. Thank you for that. So where should you start if you're in the meetings industry?
That's such a huge question, isn't it? Because there's so many different places that you could start. I guess a nice way to start is sometimes with the low-hanging fruit, some of those easier options where you can have some of those quick wins, rather than kind of trying to dive into a whole strategy about how you're going to improve things with regards to diversity and inclusion. But from this person who's answered the question, sorry, there's not a name here, I do apologise. I would like to know what area of diversity and inclusion you might be referring to, because that's a really broad question. So if you are able to specify exactly what you mean, and while you're doing that, maybe I don't know if Ashanti wants to add anything, but I'd like to find out a little bit more about what this person had a question.
So that's actually a really good point. Diversity and inclusion is so broad. As we say, this could be neurodiversity, it could be disability, it could be race, it could be gender. But in the meetings industry, we do know that there's about a 50-50, kind of 53% split of women. So maybe you're not working necessarily on gender particularly. Maybe you are looking at race and disability, for example. So in that case, Gabby made a great point about low-hanging fruit, the supply chain. Okay, because once your budget is decided, usually your stakeholders have far more choice about which businesses they work with. Now, you might be a large company whereby there's a kind of lengthy procurement process, but that does not mean that you can't work with more diverse suppliers. And the guide that we referred to in the presentation, which is absolutely free on the website, has some great tips for diversifying the supply chain. These are the quick win areas. Work with local vendors, social enterprises, those kind of diverse suppliers. And that will help you start to see some gradual change within your company, because actually you're contributing to the local economy. And yes, you are working with minority owned or managed or companies that do employ minorities. And of course, that's, worthwhile doing. Worthwhile doing. Yeah.
That was a really good example of that low-hanging fruit there with the supply chain, for sure.
Yeah. The other areas, if you are in MICE and you are organizing lots of events with speaker panels, think about diversifying your speaker panels. But also, Gabby made a brilliant point in her, when we covered that second objective, when you talked about the guest content, Gabby. That's something that in the events industry the events industry relies on content massively. Okay, if you look at the publishers, your internet content. I said internet. I'm so old. Your online content, your social content. Okay, and let's be honest. Half the time, the contributors are doing it for free. Okay, you're not paying all of your contributors. So that is a great opportunity. Maybe, for example, one of your speaker panels, if it's for, I don't know, CEOs and engineering, at the moment it's very tough to find CEOs of color, female CEOs. Okay, so maybe for that particular panel, you can't have that much diversity at that particular level. Well, okay, can we have someone from marketing? Can we have someone from operations? Can we have someone from procurement on the panel who may fit into a different category? And then further to that, can we get some of those individuals to be writing content for our website, to share content for our socials? Like those are the creative ways that you can start including diversity in the content of your events. So that was a brilliant point that I picked up on there, Gabby, when you talked about the guest blog content. I thought that was another quite handy tip there, to be honest with you.
Thanks for putting that into a real life example as well. Yeah.
And haven't we seen, Gabby, this year? I mean, I think, have been quite proud to see more diversity in the big events. I mean, IBTM right now, to put this on the global agenda is brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. And as you said, it's been great to see that there is a lot of backing support by the industry. And it's been great to see that they have been diversifying who are on their panels and who are speaking. I mean, look at us at the moment. We've got 2 Black women speaking on a webinar. I'm not sure last year if we might have seen that happen. Other events, I've seen more women. I've seen more people with different abilities and disabilities. And so we're starting to do that. And as we said, the low-hanging fruit, these are the quick, easy wins and changes that we can do. And it is happening within the industry. And I would say it is having a positive impact and working.
Yeah, absolutely. And so reach out to Gabby and I. If you're looking and struggling to find speakers to join your event or to supply content, reach out to us, find us on LinkedIn, because the chances are we may well know somebody who is more than qualified to contribute and add value to your event, who may also provide some diversity. And a little tip there is that just because you ask somebody who, is deemed to be diverse to speak at your event, they don't have to talk about diversity. They are probably a professional in an area that they have an expertise about sustainability, about chemical whatevers, and so you don't actually have to match them to a topic about diversity. What you want to do is show human beings in all of their facets within that particular industry or sector.
Yeah, brilliant point there.
Yeah. So, okay, let's just have a check and see what other questions we have. We know we're coming up to the hour shortly. Thank you for joining us. We know that time is really precious at the moment. So, and yes, on that note, do go and download the guide from the website. It's completely free. We cover the global benchmarks that we created for the MICE and the events and hospitality industry specifically. And so if you're looking for guidance about how you go about this in an appropriate way, then absolutely get yourself a copy of the Diversity Ally Guide.
And also do head to our LinkedIn page as well at Diversity Ally, because I know it sounds like plug. I don't mean it to be, but we do have lots of reports, resources, articles, news, advice, tips that we share on there regularly, so pretty much daily. So I would definitely head to there and you'll probably be able to find some sort of information or an answer to any questions that you may have around this. So do check that out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's have a look here and just double check to see if there are any other questions. Right. Well, I think we have come to the end of the session, actually. And I know for sure that this session will be available probably in a recorded format. So if you haven't been able to stay the whole time, or you are indeed watching this on the replay, then don't forget, you can still ask questions. You can present your questions and we will absolutely answer them if you come and find us online. But I'm also sure that the team at IBTM will share their questions with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Take care.